Hello and welcome to another episode of Casting Views, the podcast that takes a topic each week and, as the name suggests, cast views. This week is time for another mind wipe, and I'm really excited because I've got another first-time voice on the podcast. I have Griffin from the Reboot Deboot podcast. So, hi, Griffin.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited for this.
No, I'm really pleased because you approached where you wanted to be on here. So I'm always happy when people are willing to be part of this because, like I said, I find it a chance to. I used to say grill other podcasts, but it's a great opportunity to find out what makes people tick. I love this, finding out sort of things that people would love to relive again.
Right.
So thank you for signing up. As you are a first-time guest on here, just thought it'd be great to give people listening just a little bit of a background on you, yourself, your podcast, and your host. And yeah, just tell us about you.
So when I first contacted you, I was actually just a podcaster. Well, not exactly true. I am a self-published author, first and foremost. I've been writing seriously for just over a decade. I have 5 books that are self-published on Amazon. There's a kid's book. I just released a horror collection 2 months ago, and then I have some poetry books as well. About 3 years ago, I started a podcast with my best friend that I have been on and off again doing for the part of, 12, 13 years. So in its current iteration, we are the Reboot Deboot podcast. We will watch movies, and then we will watch their rebooted franchises or remakes, and then we compare and analyze them side by side. And we always end up asking the question or engaging like, did this really need a remake, or has the remake done anything to improve on the source material? And then more recently, about 3 months ago, I started streaming on Twitch. So I've become a full, entertainer with these 3 different very mediums.
Very busy.
Yeah, that I do. So it's like every Monday through Thursday I'm on Twitch, and then Friday is podcast day, or every other Friday when Alex gets called into his actual job. And then I'm always like writing and working on books in between all of that.
Wow. So firstly, I just want to say congratulations, if that's the right word, on being a published author. I've had a couple on here, and I've said it each time. I think it's just amazing to have done something like publish a book. I think the act of everyone thinks they've got a story or can write a book, but to be able to actually do it and get it out there must be a really great feeling.
Yes. I will say I have to self-published. I wish I was published. I wish I had a publishing company behind me, but for me, it's all me. I have to do the advertising, the marketing. I buy my own ISBN numbers. But yes, having the work out there and knowing that I have the discipline to start at no idea, and then 3 months later have a finished product where it's edited, revised, and ready for people to buy and read. It took a lot of realization of like what an author is to get to that step. It went from like, oh, well, I write little poems and pieces and bits and pieces, but then trying to establish that to a book, like to an actual proper book. And thank God for my editor, who is also my girlfriend. She is also an author. She has gone through all of my books and been like, your writing is magnetic, your writing is great, but if you put it out like this, people are going to think you're a lunatic. Because in my mind, I want to go really artistic. So initially, my early books are like, there's no page numbers, there's no glossary, there's no table of contents. It's going to be an experience. And whatever, if you lose your page, maybe you meant to lose your page. And if you pick up it, and my girlfriend was like, that's not, no. So I'm like, no,
It's not how it works.
Right. Yeah. So I very quickly realized, I'm like, right, this is the dance between art and commerce. Like this is... And so I've started keeping that in mind. And even with the most recent thing, the horror collection, that is an unconventional cover because it doesn't have my name and it doesn't have any words on the front or back. Or no, it has the name on the front, actually. Because I was like, it's just going to be like a cryptic cover and you're not going to know and you're going to have to open the book. But I'm like, that, again, that's not profitable. So, okay, Griffin, you have to put the title on the page at least.
Yeah.
So I'm like, fine. So the cover has that. But then there are still, I talk about it on Twitch sometimes too, when I'm because sometimes I'll do like writing rooms where I help people develop characters or plots, and I kind of walk them through my thought process. So I always talk about how it's always art versus commerce, and art will always get its ass kicked by commerce. So to be an artist who can make that work, you have to understand that, okay, there are some things that just have to be done this way. Like, if you're going to be a Twitch streamer, you got to get Discord. If you're going to write, you're going to need to give your audience what they expect: a glossary, a table of contents, your page numbers. So, you know, proper context for these things. That's always going to be like the basic same principles. That will never change. It's when you start allowing compromises of like, oh, well, there's a character that people might not like, so you should change it, or change the race or sex, or change this person to a more likable character. It's those things that when like art starts to get its ass kicked. So as long as you keep that balance of here's what I'm going to do to a reasonable level, then I can, as long as I play enough ball with commerce, I can be as artistically free as I want.
In your Twitch streaming and your podcast, then I guess you've got a little bit more scope to be yourself in those, right?
Absolutely. Well, even the poetry, I get to be way myself. The poetry, I'm sure some people will read it and they'll call it a manifesto. I'm sure other people will read it and they'll be like, this guy thinks he's Bukowski and Jean Paul Sartre. You know, like, so I will always be me. And the thing with being an entertainer, and I'm sure you've encountered this as well, it's about your personality, right? We're not selling clothes, we're not selling burgers, we're not fixing a car. Our product is who we are. It's how personable are you? How charming are you? How funny are you? You know, comedians, how funny are they? That's their product. So our product is our mind and our personality. How engaging can you be? So with the streams and the podcast and the writing, I'm always trying to keep it true to myself without talking to myself, without alienating the audience.
It's definitely an interesting, and sorry, this is why my mind works well. I'll be jumping back and forth now on this conversation because you've fascinated me here. The fact about art versus commerce as well. And I also want to pick you up. I mean, you said self-published as if it was, you know, it was almost like it's what's the word, that you were talking it down, but you still have to do that. That's still an achievement to get the books that done and out there, as I said. So, you know, still congratulations on that. I mean, I like the idea, as you're saying, it is about pushing the boundaries. So you might still have to conform, but there's nothing to say that people shouldn't, you know, and can't push the boundaries a little in these mediums, right?
Absolutely. Even in the horror collection, I have the first part of it, because it's split into two parts. And the first part of it are a series of vignettes about vampires. But I even have a poem structured. Well, I have a story that's actually structured like a poem. So it's not exactly linear. And one of my books that I have, so I have a book called Paint a Picture. And you know, Paint by Numbers?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
I made a paint by poetry book. I write a poem, but if you read the poem, it's actually instructions on how to create the picture that I'm describing. Because I can't draw and paint to save my life. It's one of my Achilles tendons, just like math is. But I have these like vivid ideas and these images and pictures. That's why I'm a writer. So I'm like, we have paint by numbers. Why don't we have paint by poetry? So, and the great thing too is that I left it nebulous enough that everyone will read it and everyone will be reading the same words. So you're going to know, okay, well, this part needs to be red and this needs to be a wing or this needs to be a door. But what kind of a wing? That's up to you. What shade red? That's up to you. What shade door? So no one who is going to pick up Paint a Picture and then actually draw these things, no picture will ever come out the same. Yeah. So even though it's the picture in my mind, you're the one who's still creating it. So it's your own artistic slant. You're just painting by poetry.
And yeah, I do want you. What we'll do is sort of after recording, I want you to give me all the links, and I'll put them in the show notes as well. But I definitely want to have a look at these because that's I've definitely not heard paint by poetry before.
Right, neither had I. And I'm like, it kind of seems like the next step from paint by numbers.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's always an audience, right? There's always a following, and there's probably someone out there thinking, oh, if only there was this,
Right.
ABC, but it's just not there available for them, right?
Yeah.
So, did you say what the Twitch streaming was specifically about?
I'm a variety streamer, so I will play video games while streaming, and then sometimes I will host writers' rooms. I'm actually going to start a movie theater stream soon where I watch movies from the public domain, just to
Okay.
kind of,
Yeah.
I'm going to call it
Yeah.
Jester Piece Theater because my
Yeah.
nickname is
Okay.
Jester and that's part of the Twitch thing. So I thought that'd be fun. But I'm just a variety streamer, and then the writers' rooms.
And with the podcast, yeah, I think that's such a great idea. So it's specifically, as you said, you take a film and review the original and the reboot. How did that come about?
So for that, we're gonna have to go way back to like 2008, 9, and
Okay.
I was hanging out, just being me, and my friend Ricky showed up, and he goes, "Hey, we should start a podcast." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, why not? What's your idea?" And he said we should call it the Buzzed Critics, and we will drink while we talk movies and art and like albums and shit. So I'm like, fuck it, I'll drink a 40 on screen and talk about movies for an hour, no problem. But we did it as a video format on YouTube, and that lasted a couple of episodes. But I really liked it. Like I kind of got the bug, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of fun. I like this. So Ricky ended up moving away, and then I resurrected it a few years later with my friend Jorge as the Buzz Critics. We did that, but he is a professional chef, so he got really busy, and then he has kids, so that was suspended again. So 3 years ago, I'm talking to my best friend Alex, and I'm like, we should start a podcast. And he's like, what do we start about? I'm like, well, why don't we call it Casual Conversations? And it'll just be like a chat show. And he's like, I don't know about that. And I'm like, well, what about the Buzz Critics? Let's just talk movies. And I was like, we can talk about like reboots. And Alex was like, reboot, more like deboot. Nah. And I'm like, and then we just hit the ground running.
And it's a podcast that's been rebooted itself. Then,
Yes.
as you said, it's had 3
Yes.
incarnations, right?
this is the most polished version of it. Yeah, and the podcast itself kind of took like the early episodes are kind of rough. Like originally, we didn't exactly have an idea of how it would work. So in like the third episode, which is Hellboy, which I love, there's a thing where Alex mentions a character, and I'm like, oh, who's that? But I should already know that character because I claim I love the movie, which I do, but I didn't bother watching either of them because in my head I'm like, oh, I know enough about it. So we quickly realized, okay, if we're going to do this right, we have to watch both of these movies in the week or like the 2 weeks before we do the episode, so that way we can know what we're talking about. So the show kind of takes a little while to get into itself, but I think we find our stride pretty early on. And since then, we have like 113 episodes, and each one of those is 2 movies. And we've done, like Chicago, the old like one from the 30s, and then the one with Richard Gere. We've done Seven Samurai and the Magnificent Seven, and then the remake of the Magnificent Seven, Godzilla, Street Fighter, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, the Thomas Crown Affair, Gone in 60 Seconds, Ocean's 11. I mean, if it has been remade or rebooted, we have either covered it already or we're going to.
Today I was listening to White Men Can't Jump as well,
Sure.
because I actually didn't realise that had a reboot made.
Right. Right. A couple of weeks ago, that's how about a third of our episodes go. Because the way we do is we record on the Friday and then we release that afternoon. There's no editing. It's just as soon as we're done, however long the upload takes, and then it goes up. And then Alex, I'll go, okay, so what are we doing next? And when we're out of ideas that we can think of, then we just hit Wikipedia and we go down a list of like, this has been remade, covered it, done it, covered it. And with White Men Can't Jump, I'm like, oh yeah, Alicia and I saw White Men Can't Jump on television the other night. And Alex is like, they remade that? And I'm like, let's watch it. And so, yeah, every now and then you'll hear, we usually ask each other, how did you come up, like, what's your experience with this movie or whatever? And it's like, I didn't know it existed until last week. I just didn't know.
But what a way to do it. And it's actually maybe like it was for me in that example, it's probably going to turn the audience onto a generation, whether it's the original version or the remade version, because there might be people, it's a cliche and generalization, but maybe younger generations may only know the newer films and not know necessarily it's a remake.
Almost guaranteed. I'd say most people know Gone in 60 Seconds with Angelina Jolie and Nicolas Cage. But how many people under the age of like 40 have seen the original Gone in 60 Seconds? I didn't. I knew it was a remake, but when I sat down and watched it, I was like, okay, it's cool. Like it has a crazy car chase, but then I do research into these movies, and I like the original Gone in 60 Seconds for the crazy stunts it did in that movie. It's like better than The Godfather with how that movie got made. Like it's crazy they were doing the stuff they did.
And yeah, and with Hollywood's obsession, well, I'll say obsession, but remakes are always on the cards, right? So it's not like you're going to run out of material any day.
Right. I mean, I think this all started because when I mentioned the idea of reboots to Alex, I'm like, we can talk reboots. And he's like, is that a thing? I'm like, well, they're remaking Roadhouse and they're supposed to remake The Crow. And now 3 years later, I'm like, The Crow's finally here. Like, we can finally talk about The Crow, you know? And we did Hannibal, the TV show, and then Red Dragon, the movie. And that even was kind of a remake because Manhunter came out in 1986. Technically, Red Dragon was a remake of Manhunter, but technically Manhunter is just an adaptation of Manhunter or of Red Dragon, the book. So,
yeah.
I
did have an example and I've forgotten it already, but there are films that have been almost rebooted a number of times in the past. So
Batman, Superman, Spider-Man.
There you go. Yeah. I love the idea. And I think it's such a fun thing to do. As I said, also for challenging yourself maybe to see films that you've not seen.
And we've come across some beautiful films. Thomas Crown Affair blew us away. And I never saw the original and I never saw the one with Pierce Brosnan. I just knew that it existed. So I watched the one with Pierce Brosnan and I'm like, okay, not bad. And I saw the one with Steve McQueen and Faye Dunaway and I'm like, this is amazing. Like, Steve McQueen is great. It's a great movie. And Alex kind of went down a Steve McQueen path where he watched The Great Escape, and then he watched we watched 3 or 4 Steve McQueen movies, and it's like, I get why he's the king of cool.
It's funny, I'm like that with books. Well, I used to. I tend not to read so much anymore, but if I read a book I loved, that was it. I had to get everything by that author.
Sure.
I had to read it.
Yeah.
General question, or generalized question about the topic, though. So, do you find yourself enjoying a reboot more if it follows the original closely, or do you like it to take a chance or a risk and do something slightly different?
That's actually a really good question. So, you know what a reboot is, right? Everyone knows what a reboot is. Everyone knows what a remake is. It wasn't until Alex and I got about 50 episodes in when we realized, okay, most remakes are either shot for shot of the original or they're 80% of the script cannibalized. And then they're worse because the actors aren't good or the director and producer aren't as visionary as the original, So it depends on a remake or a reboot should always take the source material and then try to do something new with it. So sometimes we will appreciate I love the remake kept the integral value of the movie. And then other times it's it really falls flat, perfect example is The Invisible Man. Iconic horror movie, iconic horror thing, Universal, Claude Rains, it was the 30s. It's a fantastic movie. Even today, anyone can just sit down and watch the old black and white Invisible Man, and I challenge you not to have a fun time watching it. And the new Invisible Man it's a work of art. It's great because Leigh Whannell, who directed it, he also directed that movie Upgrade a couple of years ago. He had this vision of, if I try to mimic the original, I'm just going to get panned because of how iconic it is. So I have to take it in a new direction while respecting the source material. So now in The Invisible Man, we follow this woman who is escaping her abusive boyfriend who is made an invisible suit. And the entire movie is her almost like sleeping with the enemy. She's trying to get away from this abusive thing. No one believes her. And it's this great paranoia cat and mouse thing. And the way the movie is shot too is kind of visionary, genius and visionary, because there's nothing brand new or groundbreaking, but it's the fact that the director uses the camera to tell hey, whether or not it's broad daylight, this is the Invisible Man. It doesn't have to be night to be scary anymore. Like, he can be anywhere. Yeah. So there's just so many like moments of silence or moments of like uncertainty where it's like, this is how ghost movies should be filmed. Like, this is the way this is it. This is the groundwork. And it blew our socks off with how fantastic that movie was. And there's some movies where the remake is just far and away so much better. Ocean's 11 is a big one. Like the one with the Rat Pack. It really is a slog. Like, it's a slog. It's boring. It also doesn't stand up too great to like modern sensibilities. And in the remake, it's got Brad Pitt and George Clooney and all of these great young talented actors at like the peak of their acting. It's such a better movie. So
that's it.
Yeah.
Well, so I was going to say, Reboot's got the opportunity to take a gem and polish it and add its own stamp to it, really, isn't it?
It should.
That's what the challenge.
Yes, it should. There are a lot of them where it's like, we didn't need it rebooted, or like either you wanted to reboot it and you missed the point of the original, so you've just made it a worse version.
Yeah, why are you rebooting it?
Right.
I guess is the question.
Yeah, and
is it because you've got technology now, maybe, or the theme is more relevant in the modern day? Who knows? But yeah, I guess that should be question number one, shouldn't it? Why?
And it's the interesting thing too is that we thought reboots were always like, oh, it's stuff for like Michael Bay or it's stuff for Uwe Boll or something. No. Yeah. The Departed? That's a remake
of an Asian film,
an Asian trilogy. It's called Infernal Affairs.
That's right.
Yeah, and Alex and I, again, like, Alex loves The Departed, and as we're going through this, he's like, The Departed's a remake? And I'm like, wait, like Scorsese's Departed? That's a remake? So then we went and we watched the first Infernal Affairs, and we're like, that's awesome. Like, that's so good. And the coolest parts in The Departed are in Infernal Affairs. It's like Scorsese just wanted to make this movie himself. And they're both equally good. Like, they're both equally fantastic.
Because I can't remember if I've seen Infernal Affairs or not. I feel like I have, but it would have been some years ago. But I guess the setting will also, for that, be a massive difference, right?
Sure.
And that's probably a reason for remaking it and setting it sort of in America. And that's the thing, right? And it's only by doing something like you're doing that you can stumble across things like that, have these conversations and these new experiences, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The amount, there have been movies that Alex and I had never heard of that have been remade, or like original movies or remakes, and it's like, that got a remake, or they remade that, and we'll hop in and it's like, oh, that was really good, like that. Insomnia with Al Pacino and Robin Williams. Okay. That's also a remake.
All right,
that's a Scandinavian film with Stellan Skarsgård that came out in 1997.
That's not even that old, really, is it?
No, like, it was 97, and then Insomnia came out in like 2001.
Yeah.
So, and Let the Right One In and Let Me In. That's another one that happened. So there are just tons of these instances that we come out where it's like, man, Insomnia is great, but the original is just a little better. Like, the original one just has a little bit more like menace to it. And nothing against Pacino and nothing against Robin Williams in that film, because it's dark and atmospheric, but the original is just, there's something a little bit more atmospheric about it,
Could that be the setting as well?
I mean, they're both isolated, cold, foggy towns. Like, one's Norway and the other is Alaska. But it's just, again, there's something about it where like every character just has a layer of gloom or like a layer of misfortune applied to them somehow. And in the American one, that's still there, but that's only applied to like 2 or 3 characters.
Right. Look, Griffin, I could actually talk to you for a couple of hours just on this now.
Right.
And you know what? I will get you back on. There is another episode I could get you back on where we can continue the conversation, but that's not why you're here.
Of course.
So we are going to have a little break where we're going to hear from some friends of the show, and then we are going to wipe your mind.
Fantastic.
Alex, what would you say if I told you there's a nerd podcast out there that talks blockbuster movies, superhero comics, TV shows, anime, and so much more?
Josh, I would say that is literally every nerd podcast out there.
Alex, that's our podcast, Talking Smack. Every Wednesday, we're supposed to be promoting it right now.
Yes, and we promote that with our amazing Upper Midwest Wisconsin accents.
Oh yeah, check out Talking Smack every Wednesday on your favorite podcatcher, don't you know?
Exactly. Crap, that was really good.
Hey everyone, this is Satsunami from the Chatsunami podcast, and you're listening to Casting Views. Without any further ado, let's get back to the episode.
Right, we are back. So, you know the format of this. I'm going to give you a number of categories from entertainment and life, etc., where you're going to imagine that you can wipe your mind and relive them for the first time. They don't have to be examples of what you think is the best example from each of these categories, but it's just those 1 to 3 things where you just want to have that joy or experience of reliving them again. And the caveat I always say to people is that you're going to enjoy it the same as you would the first time round, because certain things have aged by now, you know, like certain video games, etc., films, but you're gonna have that same enjoyment. So I'm going to be obvious. Let's start then with movies. So 1 to 3 movies that you'd love to relive for the first time.
Okay. If we're doing movies, kind of a newer one. I say newer, but in terms of the source work and everything, I'm going to have to say Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I read the book and everything, and I heard the teleplays, but when I saw that movie in theaters, and I go to that movie now, like whenever I'm feeling down or I'm just kind of feeling like maybe a little browbeaten by life or I'm a little bit in the dumps, I stick on Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and very shortly I'm back to feeling okay.
It's got such a strong follow. The people who love that story,
yeah,
absolutely love it, don't they? It's very cult is probably the word you'd throw at it, isn't it? Cult following, yeah.
It's Douglas Adams created something special with those books, but specifically with Hitchhikers that there's just something about Arthur as that character of being like the everyman, but he himself, he's just trying to get by and he can't. Like he can't get the hang of Thursdays. He just, he's kind of lost for life. And it's great that he ends up in space because he doesn't really fit in with Earth. He wants things to be simple. He wants things to just be smooth and calm. And he gets tossed into like the grandest scale of chaos you could imagine. But he works so well as a counterpoint to that. Like in an ocean, in the cosmic chaos of the universe, Arthur is the center point. Like Arthur is just calm and collected, and even when he's like browbeaten,
every man,
his friend, he has Ford there to like explain the work, like the way the universe works, and he's like, as long as I can get tea, I don't care. Like as long as I have a few things that keep me grounded, I'm fine. And I think watching that movie, it makes me feel like I'm going to be okay too. Like, you know what, Arthur? If you can handle the Earth being destroyed, if you can handle the dolphins leaving, if you can figure out how many roads a man must walk down, I'm going to be okay too.
You throw me with that. I wasn't expecting. That's the first time I think we've had that thrown out on this episode, and that is it's such a classic. Because we had it as a TV show over here.
You've seen you had like 2 or 3 versions of it. Yeah. Again, Hitchhiker's Guide has been remade a bunch.
Yeah. Now the film, I don't remember that. It was some years ago.
It was Martin
it?
Freeman. Alan Rickman is Martin Freeman is Marvin, or Martin Freeman is Arthur. Alan Rickman is the voice of Marvin the android. Most Def is Ford. It's narrated by Stephen Fry.
I've not seen the film actually.
So you have to watch it. It's so good.
I've got to correct that.
It's so wholesome and entertaining, but it has that very classic Douglas Adams and like British twist of like the humor knife. It's so good.
Great start. So what's next?
For movies, you know what? I gotta go back to my center on this. If we're talking like movies that I would love to experience for the first time, it's gotta be Brandon Lee's The Crow. I saw that when I was a kid, and Brandon Lee was just so cool. And the way they made like the city look, and it has that 90s grunge, like rough and cut, almost like a dystopian vibe to it. And then you have this dark Avenger, and he's doing it for love, and then the whole thing is like a love story. I mean, it's just great. Like, The Crow is one of my personal favorite movies, and I got a little nervous because when I found out they were remaking it, I was like, well, I knew this day would come, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be positive about this. I'm going to be uplifted. And then I saw Bill Skarsgård's makeup for Eric, and I'm like, oh no. And then I saw the trailer, and I'm like, I still want to be positive. Like, I'm still, but I'm really worried about that. But the original Crow is definitely something, and the graphic novel, but more so the movie, because I never read the graphic novel. I was born in '87, so the movie was my first like notice to that world. And none of the sequels or like the TV show they made in 2001, like just the original movie itself. That's one of my personal like favorite films, and seeing that again, just being immersed in that world, and like knowing that a guy would come back from the grave out of love and revenge and redemption, knowing that his personal conviction is so strong and dedicated that he is willing to risk his own life to come back. That was a powerful thing for me as a kid.
Yeah, and as a kid, that is pretty intense film, right?
I mean, yeah, like there, when he grabs that woman's arm and he pushes the heroin out of her veins, and he's like, "Mother is the word of God on the lips of all children," and it's like, that's a great fucking line. Like, it's great, and like Brandon Lee is just so. It was his second film, and sadly his last film. And the first movie he ever did was a movie called Rapid Fire that's really hard to find. And his second movie was The Crow. And like, you could tell he had so much potential for drama or action. And he was like perfect for the time. And, you know, tragically, like his father took him way too soon. And kind of like an exclamation mark to that movie too. It's like, not only is this special because of like James O'Barr's source material and the acting and the way it was shot, and Michael Wincott as Top Dollar and everything else, it's also like a young Brandon Lee who's like just on the rocket to stardom. Like, if he had survived, I have no doubt in my mind he'd be up there with Tom Cruise and Robert Downey Jr. in terms of acting, you know?
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. It's obviously got that, it's tinged with that tragic accident, and you know, it's made all more so sort of tragic because it was such a great performance.
Right.
I mean, very different from your first choice, but that's what this is all about, right? That's what this is all about. So what's your third entry then?
This is a little harder because the first, I had a movie that popped into my head, but it's really like a tie amongst three of them, and I'm having to like eliminate, you know, but
Yeah.
Probably Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Okay.
I am, first and foremost, you strip away everything, and I am a horror fanatic. I've seen every horror movie under the sun. I've watched horror documentaries. I used to read Fangoria. I love horror films. And even more if those horror films have depth to them. You know, like, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with seeing a bunch of, like, campers get massacred by a machete-wielding hockey mask goalie, you know? Love that. Give it to me all.
Yeah.
No problem seeing, like, a woman menaced in space by an alien. Love it. Take it any day of the week. But there's something about Dracula. Maybe it's the novel, too. But again, it's this guy had love, lost it, and then decided, you know what? If her soul can't go to heaven, like, because in the movie it claims that Vlad Tepes, it's also like kind of baked in history because they made Dracula Vlad Tepes. So like, if Vlad went off to like fight the Turks, and then the Turks fired an arrow through his castle's window, his betrothed reads it, she throws herself from a balcony, and the Orthodox priests, when he returns from war, and we're not talking like tanks and drones, we're talking like up close and personal, like swords and spears. Like, you can smell like the chaos and the misery and the blood and that psychological damage when this dude who came back from that war-torn, like blood on the field, cut down men, and then to have a priest be like, well, she can't go to heaven. It's like, do you know how many people I've massacred for you? And like to keep this chapel standing? Like, I've killed hundreds of people that I've sinned for God. And you're telling me that my reward is the woman I was going to marry is not going to heaven? Then I renounce your God, and instead I'm going to become a curse on humanity. And then from there we get the Dracula story. And the only reason why Gary Oldman actually did Dracula is because when he was reading the script, he wanted to say the line, "I've crossed oceans of time to find you." Like, that line meant so much to him alone. He's like, I'll do the entire movie. And like, it's a great horror film. It's a beautiful romance film. And Winona Ryder, Keanu Reeves, Anthony Hopkins, Gary Oldman, like, it's, across the board, it's fantastic.
Yeah, again, I'm going to say great choice. I've seen it, but again, I only saw it once, probably years ago. And I remember seeing it because at the time, or just prior, I was also reading the book.
Sure.
And, what I would say is, it is a great watch because most people, they think of Dracula, they think of either the spoofs or the modern takes of vampires. But this is, as you said, at its heart, is that story about love and vengeance, isn't it? And anger. And I love Gary Oldman. And I was watching him recently. I don't know if you've seen it, the Apple show, Slow Horses. He's in that. And I was saying to my wife, I'm not saying that he's not appreciated. I think his work goes, I noticed the way he plays different people each time. I just think he's a great character actor. And yeah, I just think he's such a pleasure to watch.
There's that, it's that meme, right? Like, one day you're going to hear the word cut and you're going to peel off your face and it's going to be Gary Oldman under there going back to his trailer. Like, that's how good of an actor he is, like.
Do you know, I've not heard that, but that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's like one day we're all going to find out we're just Gary Oldman. It's Alicia and I watched Red Dragon the other day, and he's in that. He plays Victor Mason Verger. He's in in the Edward Norton Red Dragon. He is Mason Verger, but he has all this makeup, and it's like, yeah, that's Gary Oldman. And I had to remind Alicia, I'm like, that's Gary again. Like, that's Gary Oldman, but you can't tell because he is unrecognizable under the prosthetics and the, But yeah, he's done some great films.
The funny thing is that over here, when people find out, they're quite shocked. But he has a sister who stars, I don't know if she still is, but she's in one of our long-running soap operas on British TV.
Coronation Street?
No, that's the longest one. No, so well done on that. But no, EastEnders.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, his sister's in that. So if anyone is listening to that, I just want to remember the character. I think she's called Big Mo. But it's always that classic thing that when you tell someone and they're not aware, the mouth just drops because you wouldn't necessarily look at them and say they're related. But it's just so funny to see that in one of our longest running soap operas and one of the more memorable characters, that's his sister. So right. I'll challenge you, or I'll task you afterwards, to look up EastEnders Mo and to have a look at Gary Oldman's sister. Right. So that was movies. We're going to stick in and around the same world then. So how about TV shows?
Okay, if we're just going to mind wipe it, I'd like to rewatch Burn Notice.
Nice. Okay. I don't know too many people that have seen that.
Again, I'm a horror fan. I love Bruce Campbell. When I found out Bruce Campbell was in like a TV show, I was like, what? And I started watching Burn Notice on season 4. And I'm like, oh, this is like a drama, like an action thing. Okay. And the characters were cool and it was very slick. And the way Matt Nix writes his episodes, I'm like, this is really cool. And plus Bruce Campbell is in it, is like a retired Navy SEAL. And he's
great in it.
Oh, he's so good as Sam Axe. And I'm like, this is really cool. So then I went back and I bought the first 3 seasons of Burn Notice on DVD so I could binge them before the next episode of season 4 so I could get caught up. And I was like, this show is great. Like, this is just across the board. I love Burn Notice. I'm actually, I'm rewatching it again with Alicia currently. And we're in the 6th season, about halfway through. And it's just like, I love this show so much. Like, it's just so good.
Yeah, me and my wife watched it a couple of years ago again because I think we'd watched it originally when it was running on our TV here, but I can't remember if I ever watched the final season. So I said, tell you what, let's watch it again. And exactly like you said, it's a very smart, it's a very slick, it's very well written. There's an element of kind of like a modern A-Team vibe to it, isn't there?
Yeah. It's like Airwolf or Miami Vice or A-Team, but it's so much more slick than that. It's so much more cool. The characters are actually characters. Even like the minor characters who just appear for one episode, the way Matt Nix is able to like show that each one has depth or they're actually fully fleshed out characters. It's like his writing is great for that. And then the acting too. I mean, across the board, they're all fantastic.
There's genuine humor in it as well. It can be really funny, and when you're seeing him and when he's doing the explanations about what he's building and stuff like that, that's just, it's captivating. Yeah.
Right. So I was really into Burn Notice, and it turns out that I don't know how much of this is true, but allegedly Matt Nix talked to a former spy who told him, you should write this. Da-da-da. So within the first 2 or 3 seasons, Matt Nix was actually contacted by local police departments in the Miami area because they're like, you need to change the way you write because people are actually using it to do crime. Like, you were actually giving away like trade secrets, and like apparently the FBI contacted him and they're like, you can't do this anymore because it's screwing up our sting operations. And Matt Nix was like, but the ratings. And then he just kept going. Like,
art versus
art versus covers.
It does have the quintessential villains as well, doesn't it? You have numerous ones, but yeah, you've got those people that come in and their main aim is just to menace the main character, right?
When like Alicia and I are watching this, and I know what's coming. I know all the beats and stuff. So when they get to the 5th season and they introduce the Anson, he is such he's like Moriarty. He's so good. Like when he turns to Michael, he's like, Michael, you don't have any moves left. I wrote your psychological profile. I know what you're going to do. I know what your friends are going to do. You have no moves on the chessboard. You have to do what I say. And it's like, you hate him, but he's right. Like, he is right. He is like he is like Moriarty. Like, Sherlock Holmes called Moriarty the Napoleon of crime. And even in the Sherlock Holmes books, Moriarty was this great thinker who could rival Sherlock, and that's what Anson is to Michael. Like, Anson is this unstoppable force. He's smarter. He's 2 steps ahead. And if you want to beat someone like that, you have to go to drastic measures to stop him. And
is it Jeffrey Donovan?
It is Jeffrey Donovan, yeah.
He's got those people that can make you laugh or engage you just with a look. He's got that, that awkward smile he does because he never wants to smile, but people force
right.
He doesn't mind helping people, but he doesn't want to be like thanked. He doesn't want to be, the emotional. And he's got that awkward smile he does, and I think it's brilliant.
It's why I'll see what I can do. It's always I'll see what I can do. There was actually I was so influenced, and I saw Burn Notice when I was like 23 or 24. I was so influenced by that show. I went out looking for a pair of shades. Like Michael Weston, like the gold rim amber glasses. His shades were Oliver Peoples, and they were $400. I found a pair, not identical, but close enough for me for $6. And I've had those pair that I wear every time I go outside, and I've had them for years.
Yeah, great choice. And again, not one I've heard on here. And I really enjoy it. And there's a spate of similar shows that I won't say any. I don't know, because I don't know what your other choices are, but it came at a time where there was some other really good, slick shows, crime shows.
Yeah, over here it was USA was the channel. There was one about a lawyer called Suits. There was Burn Notice. There was one it's called Nip Tuck.
The one I'm thinking of that I really enjoy as well, I don't know if you ever saw, was Leverage.
I haven't seen Leverage, but I've heard good things.
Haven't seen Leverage?
I've heard good things about it, though.
Check that out. That's another one I rewatched recently. But anyway, this isn't my mind wipe. So what's next in TV shows?
MASH.
Okay.
It's gotta be MASH.
Wow. Iconic.
I mean, iconic, but so human. Like, so human, so funny, set in one of the most unfunny situations you could imagine.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
and across the board, like every season just gets better and better and better. And every episode isn't always a laugh fest, because some of them are about like the human horror of what we're experiencing. The characters are just great. They work so well together. I mean, yeah, definitely MASH. When I was a kid, I would hate it because I'd hear the theme, which is "Suicide is Painless," and it would always mean bedtime. I knew, like, when I heard when I heard that in the helicopters, I knew I was never going to bed soon. And then when I got older, I think in my early teens, I saw an episode of MASH, and it was specifically, the episode was where BJ was working on a guy. He was trying to do heart surgery to keep him alive so he wouldn't die on Christmas. And they were trying to run out the clock. Like, they knew he was going to die, and BJ was just trying to keep him alive. And at the end of the episode, he doesn't make it, but BJ adjusts the clock so that the time of death reads it's the 26th. And BJ's like, at least his kids won't be, at least Christmas won't be the day that Dad died.
Yeah.
And that was like the first episode that I saw that I was like, whoa. And I'm like, okay, I need to go back. So then I watched MASH from the first episode forward. I'm like, I totally get why the season finale is one of the most highly watched, like, televised events of all time. I totally get it.
It's a show I remember watching here in the UK. Don't remember much about it because, again, it was years ago, and I don't think I've ever seen it air on our normal terrestrial TVs here. But yeah, it was probably the first show that struck me as being able to make you laugh and cry within the same episode.
Absolutely.
And as you said, the theme tune being so haunting as well, you know, that stays with you. It's a great tune, you know, but again, it's just at the end of an episode, especially if it's been a particularly sort of emotional one, yeah, that theme stays with you, doesn't it?
Yeah. I have an honorable mention for a fourth TV show.
Okay, yeah, well, we haven't had your third yet,
It's a TV show you might be pretty well acquainted with, actually. If I could wipe it and watch it again, it'd have to be The Young Ones.
Oh, wow. I tell you what, you've come with some really, well, I want to say out there ones, but it's just ones I wouldn't have thought, we said Young Ones. Yeah, do you want to explain?
So The Young Ones was a short-lived British television show with 2 seasons, and it's actually a shoot-off from a group of young British comedians from a program called Not the 9 O'Clock News. And it's a partial creation of Adrian Edmondson and Rick Mail. Was Ben Elton connected? I don't think he was.
I'm not sure if he may have written. He may have been part writer,
I think so. I'm having a Ben Elton connection, but I'm not sure why. Maybe it's the Blackadder thing and Rowan Atkinson. But yeah, The Young Ones, the first time I saw that, I was like the right age, because my stepfather is from Britain. He's a Manchester born, lived in Liverpool. His favorite team is Liverpool. And he's been in my life since I was like 15 or 16. So he brought with him Red Dwarf, Blackadder, The Young Ones, Bottom, Filthy Rich and Cat Flap. Wow. So I have all of this British television being thrown on me when I was like 15, 16. And my biological father is kind of a scumbag and not in the picture at all. So I was always kind of angry. I was kind of looking for, something. And my stepdad, when he brought The Young Ones and he put it on and I watched the first episode, I was hilarious, just so funny. But I loved it was a variety show because it had a band in it. The first band in the first episode was 9 Below Zero, kind of like ska band. So they did that. And I was watching it and I'm like, these 4 guys are just vile. They're ignorant. They're unlikable. But it is hilarious to see them antagonize each other. And it didn't look pretty. Like, their house is just like dirty and messy and it looks like a pit. But that chaotic energy, I'm like, this resonates really well with me in terms of like underdog spirit, in terms of like razor sharp wit, but also like relatable enough that everyone can just sit down and you either love it or you hate it. Like, I showed the household here, The Young Ones, and 2 members of the house were like, this is the most chaotic thing I've ever seen. And I'm like, isn't that great? Like, isn't that great that this is
chaotic is the word.
Yeah, because they're having that whole conversation, and like out of nowhere, Vivian just bursts through the wall. It's like,
yes.
what are we, like, even now on television shows, you don't see this kind of randomness. But you realize this isn't random. This is written. This is planned. That wall was made to be destroyed. Like, this is just the show and how it works. And as an audience member, you don't know what's going to happen. And it is unpredictable. It's loud. It's violent. But it's perfect.
You're spot on. You are either literally going to love it or hate it. It feels like there's no in between. And yeah, I was just checking. Yeah, Ben Elton was a writer on there.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it makes sense. He was linked with Blackadder as well. And you said you watched
I love Blackadder. I love Blackadder.
Yeah, the thing about the young ones, so they you know, obviously they're clearly sort of like grown men, but they're playing university students, aren't they? I think they're living together, and then you've got Mike, the one who's supposedly the cool one, haven't you? So you've got the others, and it is crude, it is loud, and I probably haven't seen it since the 90s when it aired, and as a kid, that was the sort of show that you were attracted to, right? Because it was just absolute chaos. But yeah, that is another one that you proper surprised me with that.
Do you want to know the interesting thing about that? There's an American remake of The Young Ones that MTV made called Oh No, Not Them, and I can only find the intro on YouTube.
Oh, really?
So they filmed an intro. They have to film an episode, and I've never seen it. But it can't possibly be good. But I'm so morbidly curious to see what an American Young Ones is like.
That would be quite intriguing, because I think for me the whole thing is it was in like a rundown British house.
Right.
You know, it's that Britishness, I think, for me that made it, and that's being from the country,
right? And like it's such a British show in that it resonated so well with that late 80s, early 90s British wave of youth who were coming off of the 70s punk. You know, they were kids in the 70s, so now they're growing up, and, you know, Rick is supposed to be the people's poet, and he's this sanctimonious coward. Vivian is just this totally violent punk. He's a sociology student, but none of them ever go to class. Neil is like the reject hippie who's about like 10 years away too late. And then Mike is supposed to be this Lothario, but he only ever sleeps with his blow-up doll, you know? Like, it's all these stereotypes that, okay, they're resonating, but the way that they write, because it's so English, like they make references to English television shows, and they have like a Peter Cushing joke, and all the bands are English. Motorhead, they had Madness on there twice, and it's just like, I don't know how the American audience or how American producers would take The Young Ones.
I'm struggling to think, because this would definitely have been made without the intention of ever thinking it would cross to another country.
Right. So I found, it's called Oh No, Not Them, and I found the intro, but if I could get just a copy of the pilot, like just give me a copy of the pilot, because then the next thing is I'm making Alex watch all 12 episodes of The Young Ones, and we're doing a special on the podcast about it.
There you go. But well, look, if anyone's listening and can help out, get in touch.
Yeah,
get in touch with Griffin or myself.
Please.
Because I'll be honest, I'm intrigued as well.
Right.
So,
it seems like such a weird choice to be like, well, there's this British television show that's doing pretty well with the youth. We need something for youth programming too. Put it on MTV. Like, what? No, it's not going to resonate the same.
Well, there's a whole batch of shows, that British shows that have been or attempted to be made in American, and I just don't think it translates.
No, our version of coupling sucks. Yeah, we have a version of coupling, and I'm like, the English one's way better. Like, it's funnier, it's slicker, the jokes land way more naturally. It just, it's just something gets lost in translation from English humor.
Yeah, there definitely is. There definitely is. Especially, I think, if you're going to go back to like the 80s and 90s with, you could even go back further and say like Monty Python.
Sure.
I think that was a one of a kind. And Young Ones, and definitely Blackadder. It's
a bit of Fry and Laurie.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, we need to talk at some point. Yeah, you're bringing up all my childhood memories here. Did you have an honorary mention?
So the honorary mention, if I already said that, was going to be The Young Ones.
Oh, okay, okay. All right. Yeah. No. You've got your three. So you've got Burn Notice, Mash, and Young Ones. Again, a real mix there. So let's change completely. I said to you games. Now, it can be video games. If you're not a video gamer, it can be board games. So just, 1 to 3 games that you'd like to relive.
Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Good choice.
That it hits. Amazing soundtrack, awesome gameplay. I love the aesthetic of it. I'm a huge Castlevania fan. I love like the horror aspect of like vampires, so I gravitated to Castlevania very early with like video games and stuff. My console experience, I was a kid, like a baby to kid. We had a Nintendo, we had a Super Nintendo, then a Sega, then I got a Game Boy, then I jumped to PlayStation 2, and then I got out of gaming for years up until my late 20s. And then I got back into PC gaming. But Symphony of the Night I still hold that game as probably one of the greatest video games ever created.
And are you able to or would you get that again if you could, or I don't know, on modern consoles?
I have it with a PlayStation 2 here, and I was playing it last week.
Yeah.
Like I've kept it. I've kept it safe and secure.
Yeah.
I have a PlayStation 2 that still works, so I have it. It's safe.
Yeah, treasure that. So, do you not dabble so much now with video games then?
I got out of it, but I got back into it in my later 20s. So from like the age of like 16 to like 26, I didn't game because I had made friends and we started going to concerts and I got really into music, and that's kind of where I live. Like music is my main thing.
Okay.
So I got really into like music, and I've seen a bunch of bands, and I was in a band, and I was hanging out with friends and doing all that, and I was never home. So I didn't really have time to game, and reading was in between hanging out with friends. And then in my late 20s, life hit and we all started moving and shit like that. And I kind of found myself with, I have a job, but I don't have anyone to hang out with. Well, what's going on in the gaming world? I'll go back to that. And then I picked up a PC and I was like, oh, Steam, right. I've heard that mentioned. And then I just kind of got back into gaming.
And especially now, gaming feels like it's more of a time sink than it ever used to be when we were kids as well.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, because I'm interested that you said about music. So, I know that's a category coming up. So what's the next game then?
If I had to wipe another game that I could just like be amazed by, probably Spyro the Dragon.
Okay.
Spyro.
Okay.
That one hits a lot of nostalgia. It was like 95. I think it came out like 95, 96. And I was like perfect age to video game as a kid, like I only had to worry about schoolwork and gaming. And I had some friends, but we'd all play games. So I have very vivid memories of like a Friday night, we've ordered Little Caesars pizza and I'm playing Spyro in the living room. And my mom's like on the couch behind me reading a book, or they're listening to music or something on the stereo. And I just very vividly, like even now when I play like the Reignited trilogy of Spyro, that original game, I'm like, this feels like home, like this is always. So definitely Spyro to get that again. And plus Stuart Copeland is the soundtrack to that.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah, because that was a series of game really I missed out on.
The first one's a blast. It's just a cute, fun little platformer, like a 3D platformer. It's great. The levels are simplistic but complicated. The gameplay's fun and easy. You can just pick up and play and, get lost in a really beautiful world for, 20 minutes or an hour.
Well, that's it. Well, I got on a bit of a nostalgia kick recently, and you mentioned the Reignited trilogy, so I did pick that up. And yeah, what you said is just fun.
Yeah.
That's it. It's just something you can waste a half hour or more, whatever you want, and just enjoy yourself a little bit. Okay, another classic game there on the console choice. So what would be your third one?
Okay, if I'm just like so the way I'm doing this is, as you're asking me these, it's the first thing that like, what do I go, like I'm stripping away all of my sophisticated answers. I'm stripping away all of like my prepared answers, and I'm just like, what are my core what are my core things? Yeah. So if I gotta go for core, it's gotta be Twisted Metal 2.
Okay, not one I'm familiar. I mean, I know it, but not one I'm familiar with. Yeah, very different from Spyro.
Sure, yeah. It's again, it is the vehicular combat game. I know there's like Road Rash, and I know that Vigilante 8 exists, and I know that Carmageddon exists. Twisted Metal takes the crown for vehicular combat. The characters are great. There's even a remake of that now in a TV show format. That might be an episode later on, but with TV shows, it's going to be a little longer because Alex has a schedule. But yeah, Twisted Metal 2, awesome soundtrack. Just simple fun. You multiplayer, so you and your friends can just blast the crap out of each other in these cars. Full of like puns in the levels. Like there's one where you're on New York skyscrapers and you can see the Statue of Liberty, and if you shoot it with a missile, it will either explode into a very attractive woman in a red bikini, or she balloons out to a very large woman. Right. And it's just like, it's just fun to, destroy the atmosphere or like the surroundings in ways like that.
Yeah, yeah.
The cars and characters are legacy cars because they keep some of them throughout the entire franchise. Okay. And when I watched the Hulu show or the Peacock show, Twisted Metal, I fell in love with it. I'm like, this show's awesome, but because I played the game so much that I'm like, this feels like the game, which feels like home. Like, I love it.
Again, all sort of classic or great choices there for the gaming. But yeah, I kind of want to move on because you said about music. So I want to get onto these two categories now because I'm quite keen to see what your answer is going to be on this now. So if we start with, I said 1 to 3 albums or artists. So it's up to you how you want to do that. You can either say bands, I don't mind bands, or if there's particular albums that stand out for you, happy for it to be.
There are albums there are bands that stand out for me, and there are albums that stand out for me. And yeah, when it comes, I was raised in a musical household. When I just had my mom, she would play The Cure and Joy Division and the B-52s and the Violent Femmes, and she would play Susie and the Banshees and Sisters of Mercy. But because I was an only child and there was no father in the picture, my mom would always have to take me, like if she was going to a friend's house, hey, can I bring Griffin? And she would sometimes work with younger people. So my mom had, like, when she was in her like mid 30s, she might work with people in their like 20s or something, like 25, 26. So because I'm there hanging out with them, I'm being exposed to Primus and Alice in Chains and Mother Love Bone, and I'm hearing the Screaming Trees, and I'm hearing 9 Inch Nails. I remember hearing the Downward Spiral when it came out because my mom's friend had a listening party. And that is not an appropriate album for like a 6-year-old or 7-year-old to hear. But I was there. So, and then when my stepfather came into the picture, he brought with him the Wild Hearts and Aerosmith. And because my mom already liked that stuff anyway, Led Zeppelin and Queen, and, just the floodgates of music opened, and the Sex Pistols, the Damned, the Dead Kennedys, the Clash, and so all this stuff. And then the older I got, I would do exploration too of like, well, where did this come from? Because I used to like Green Day. And then I discovered the Clash and the Stiff Little Fingers. And I'm like, oh, they're way better than Green Day. So I stopped listening to Green Day. So then when I got into high school, all my friends who were just getting into like music or punk and they were listening to like a third wave of ska, I had already like 10 years worth of music stuff from the 90s and older generation. So I'm super into music. If we're talking albums that I could go back through, though, like have wiped, first one off the bat, gotta be Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction.
Nice. Great choice there, yeah.
Like, it's iconic. It is a phenomenal debut album. And let's take away Axl's ego. Let's take away, like, the parody that you can make of Guns N' Roses, right? Let's strip away the Illusion albums. Let's forget the Spaghetti Incident. Let's take it back to like GNR Lies, the Uzi Suicide Vanity label, and Appetite for Destruction. And if we're looking at the time of music and the area it came from, because grunge in Seattle was kind of rocking. We had Mother Love Bone in like the 90s, and there's no doubt that grunge killed metal, like hair metal and glam in the 90s. But there's something about that Appetite for Destruction that if you listen to it from start to finish, and you listen to it loud. We don't play, music needs to be loud. It needs to be appreciated. You have to hear every sound, so play it loud. And if you stick on Appetite for Destruction from the beginning to the end, you can just hear it's these group of guys. They're in their 20s. They're broke. They're angry, but they know how to play. Like, they know their instruments. They work well as a band. And Appetite for Destruction is genius.
And Axel was, he was only 19?
Yeah.
20? Was it?
Yeah.
He's a young guy.
Little fucker's younger than me on that album. Like,
well, I was saying, what was I doing at 20? I certainly wasn't.
Right. When I was 20, I was not making an album that would forever become a legacy,
Yeah, no, it is incredible. It is incredible. And like you said, sort of everything that's happened since, you're seeing the videos of him touring now and the comments people are making. This is 40 years on. Like you said, take that album. Remember, it's a debut album as well, as you said. I mean, it's just phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. Those first albums, the debut albums that are just totally listenable. I mean, for me, almost the other end, but I don't know how much of Oasis,
Yeah, totally.
That is my favourite band. Those are, that's the band I will defend,
Of course, yeah.
But even them, their debut album, for me anyway, is every track is a listenable track.
It absolutely
you don't
is.
skip it.
With Oasis, look at the first 3 albums.
Yes,
Like, who has a run like that of 3 albums? It's hard to do. I mean, by the time you get to What's the Story, Morning Glory, it's like, okay, I understand why they were the biggest band in the world for a while. Like, I get it.
Yeah, definitely. And then the later albums, hit and miss. But yeah, definitely the strength of those first few albums can't be argued, I don't think. Anyway, okay, what's coming after Appetite for Destruction?
Appetite for Destruction, we got to go back. Toys in the Attic, Aerosmith.
Okay, yeah, I like Aerosmith.
It's Aerosmith's 3rd album, and it was the album that solidified them as America's answer to the British that were, because the 50s we had like Elvis and Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry, and you had all that, and you had country, you had Johnny Cash and June Carter, Jerry Lee Lewis and Marty Robbins, but then you have the 60s hit, and aside from like Hendrix and Joplin and Starship and San Francisco doing their thing, you had Pink Floyd, Cream, The Who, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, The Beatles, The Rolling Stones. It was the British invasion for a reason. And it seemed like, culturally at least, the British were overtaking the colonies. Like, they were taking the colonies back through music, Yeah. Elvis tried to get the Beatles deported because they were taking his audience. So, in all of this, there was no like clear American answer. Hendrix was kind of on the way out. The Doors, like even then, Hendrix was appreciated more in Britain. The Doors were appreciated more in Britain. So we were kind of turning our nose up to our own rock bands. And it wouldn't be until like Aerosmith hit that, oh, okay, so it's not just the English who can do this. And the first Aerosmith album, it's a little rough, it's a little shaky. The second one, they're getting a little more confident. By the time you get to Toys in the Attic, it is a band who have fully polished and sharpened their teeth. That album is fantastic. I mean, no more, no more. The first lyric, and like the first line in that song, blood stains the ivories on my daddy's baby grand, ain't seen the daylight since we started this band. It's a great line. It's so good. But it also sums up the fact that they have, like, Dream On was the first album. And that's probably the only song that a non-Aerosmith fan would know is on that first album.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The second album, Get Your Wings, we've got Train Kept A-Rollin', same old song and dance. But the third album, we get Sweet Emotion. We get No More, No More. We get Walk This Way. We get Big 10 Inch. It's like such a degree of like, and Toys in the Attic as well, too, the song. It is fully polished. They're young, they're hungry, they're deeply fueled by drugs, but they're making this fantastic music and album that's like, it is great. The musicianship is perfect. The chemistry of the band is perfect. They're fully confident. Steven Tyler has now ditched his weird, like, fake blues voice that he was doing on the first album, and now he can let his full range go. Like, Joe Perry has just become this monster of a guitar player. It's a great album. Like Toys in the Attic, from start to finish, is just flawless.
I had a phase where, I was really into them. And it may come off of the collab with Run DMC. I think that's probably how I would have been introduced to them sort of as a kid.
Sure.
But yeah, again, another one where you look at them now or when they performed longer than they should do, but don't take away from what they were in their prime. Absolutely.
From 73 to like 85, those are out. Like when most people think Aerosmith, they think Walk This Way. Fine. Okay. Maybe then they think Janie's Got a Gun, Love in an Elevator, Dude Looks Like a Lady. And then even more current fans, you might think of Jaded, I Don't Want to Miss a Thing, Amazing, Crying. No. I'm before all of that. Go way back. Like the fourth album they did, Rocks, came out in 1976. And when Steven Tyler was asked, why is the album called Rocks? Steven Tyler just replied, because it does. And there was a young man by the name of Saul Hudson. And he was like 15, 16, kind of a snot-nosed teenager. He was lucky enough to be invited to an older girl's house. And she invites him into her bedroom. And they're making out. And she puts on this Aerosmith album, Rocks. Saul Hudson is so immersed by the album, he listens to it twice and leaves the girl's home to go ask his mom to buy him a guitar. That guy is Slash from Guns N' Roses.
Is that the story?
Like he was. That's it. He was so enthralled by that Aerosmith album. He ended up becoming Slash.
I didn't know that. I'll put my hand up.
So to hear those early Aerosmith albums, it's such a far cry from what they would go on to do later. And to just hear like Toys in the Attic again, if you listen to them from start to finish, you're like, I get why they were America's rock band.
Yeah.
I get why they were one of the biggest and why one of the longest lasting.
And, not saying it's right or wrong, but they were a band that enjoyed the life.
They were unapologetic.
Yeah.
And they were lucky enough to survive it. I say again, like Amy Winehouse.
Yes, yeah.
I love Amy Winehouse, but even more than her music, I love her spirit because she was like, I'm not going back to rehab, to the point where she wrote a song about it.
Yeah.
And you know what? You have to give respect to people when they're like, they know the risks, they're living life on their terms. And if they end up tragically because of that, at least they knew the risks. Like, most of us don't do that. Most of us play safe and we play sensible. And there's just another breed of people who are like, I'm going to roll the dice. And if it comes out bad, at least I'm the one who rolled them.
You think what she put out and people like her, those artists, what they're able to put out in that short span.
Hendrix, Cobain. Yeah. There's tons of them. It's like Bill Hicks used to say, if you don't think drugs ever made anything good, go home and burn all your records.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a quote. Okay, and what's your third choice here?
Third album would have to be 2005's Gypsy Punk's Underdog World Strike from the band Gogol Bordello.
Do you know, I'm going to be honest, I don't know that. I don't know them.
So, Gogol Bordello are a very complicated band that I'm going to summarize very quickly for you. Initially, the main creative force behind the band, his name is Eugene Hutz. He is a Ukrainian. His parents left Ukraine after the Chernobyl reactor. They moved to New York. Eugene was raised on music, but he was raised on traditional Roma music from his uncle and his family. So being a little like refugee kid in America, being kind of a stranger in a strange land, and then being introduced to bands like Nick Cave and the Ramones and having that New York punk scene in the 80s, 90s, Eugene was heavily affected by this, and he took it into his own music. So he went around New York finding other immigrants who were also having this disconnect, and he created a gypsy punk band called Gogol Bordello. The first two albums are kind of traditional. The third album we get to is Gypsy Punk's Underdog World Strike, and by that point, it's a 9-member band. They're from all around the world. There was an Ethiopian guitar player. He had an Israeli, bass player. He had an Israeli guitar player. He had a Japanese and a South Korean dancer on stage with him who would also play percussion. He has a Spanish rapper who also plays percussion in the band. He has an older Russian playing violin.
Wow.
They are a fan. It's just such an amazing mix of like music,
Yeah.
and then it's this like traditional gypsy Roma music mixed with like punk, like straight up just the energy of like punk and Primus, and you throw that together on one album. And the first time I heard Gypsy Punks, I was like, this hits every. Like, I love classical music, I love punk music, I love like unabashed rock, I love the underdog thing of like an indie band just like gritting their teeth. And Gypsy Punks hit all those notes for me. I'm like, this album is fantastic. And I've seen Gogol Bordello now like 7 or 8 times, and they've changed too over the years. Sometimes when Eugene fell in love, their next album, Transcontinental Hustle, was a little more Spanish flamenco, salsa influenced. Their latest albums, I believe it's still Seekers and Finders. They're just so unique, so creative, so much like musical talent and influence from around the world. But it all goes back to like Gypsy Punks was the album where I'm like, this is something special. Like this is something cool and unique. And I'm going to be worse if I don't find out about this band.
You know, I'm gonna listen to this because the beauty of doing this episode for me is that I do get to find out bands or films or
Sure.
etc. that I've not seen, and I do love going to listen to them, and I do. And there's been a number of bands I've listened to now, and I actually do enjoy them, and I'll put them in the road, my listening rota now. And there was one from a couple of episodes ago, a couple of mind wipes ago, Marie and from podcast.
Ghost?
Yes, Ghost. Oh, you listen to that. And she describes it as satanic ABBA. And I can only agree with what a term.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, totally.
It's a band that if I saw written down or I saw an article, probably wouldn't go listen to them. But because, a friend has said it, so I've gone to listen to it. And I was thinking, how have I not heard these people? And this is the same thing that you've just said with this band. It just sounds very much up my street in terms of the eclecticness of it.
Sure. Do you remember when Live 8 happened?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so Madonna had a set at Live 8. She actually brought on 3 members of Gogol Bordello with her.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. She actually when she was married to Guy Ritchie, she also made a movie, and Gogol Bordello are in it.
Okay.
And they have like a whole like thing in the movie. But yeah, my friend Alex, who I do the podcast with, he introduced me to Gogol Bordello because he saw Primus and Gogol Bordello were supporting Primus. And Alex came back and he's like, I just found out about this band. They were supporting Primus. They're awesome. And he let me borrow their EP, which is called East Infection. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like this is like there's like violin in there, but it's like frantic violin, and they're like it's like a rock album with like classical music, but it's like gypsy kind of like classical music. This is great. And then, Gypsy Punks came out, and I'm like, it is gypsy and punk music merged. And then the albums from there just evolve.
Okay, I'm coming back to you on that. I promise you. The thing is, right, there's a number of categories I need to get to, so we might have to just blitz through these, which is a shame because it's been fascinating speaking to you, and you and I have got to talk more at some point.
I would love to.
Right, let's stick on that same theme. So, gigs or shows?
Okay, at the start, Velvet Revolver.
Okay, yeah.
I got to see, I was one of the few people who was lucky enough to see Velvet Revolver while they were around before Scott Weiland passed. I also got to see Stone Temple Pilots with Scott Weiland before he passed. But the first time I saw Velvet Revolver, it just felt special. It just felt cool to see. They were kind of like unshackled. They were a little unfettered. And it almost felt like they were a brand new band and not a super group.
That's really cool, though, because, again, it's a band very much spoken about, very much, revered. But, yeah, I don't know anyone who's potentially seen them. So.
Right. They had 2 albums.
Yeah.
And they were around for about, 6 years.
Yeah.
And not like a consecutive 6 years because they would break up and then, Scott would have his problem with drugs and then Scott died. So now you're never going to be able to see Stone Temple Pilots. You're never going to be able to see Scott Weiland and the Roustabouts. You're never going to see Velvet Revolver. I was lucky enough to see Velvet Revolver like 5 times.
Wow.
But that first time, it was just like, it was fantastic. It was just special. It was cool.
And this is it. And this is, I was listening to an old radio show, and obviously you can't always do it, but this guy was saying, he was vowing to take his kids to shows, to gigs, if they were coming into town, of even bands he liked, because he said at some point these bands aren't going to be around.
Sure.
And he wants to be able to have his kids say that they were there when they saw the last, I don't know, I think it may have even been like the Beach Boys. He was saying there's going to be a time where it's that band's last gig.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And he wants to say he's been there. Okay, what's next?
So next up would have to be the first time I saw Gogol Bordello.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah, no, that's fair.
Because I maintain, I've seen the original Sex Pistols. I've seen Aerosmith a bunch. I've seen Judas Priest. I saw Dio and Motorhead and Iron Maiden at the same show. I've seen so many bands. I can say confidently, the best live band I have ever seen are Gogol Bordello. I have never seen a band put more energy. I've never seen a band put more just passion and like chaos into their live shows. I've seen bands at Download Festival, at 9 Inch Nails, the Yeah, Muse, Beck. They're all great. They're all fantastic. But Gogol Bordello are the best live band I have ever seen. And I had been listening to them. I was listening to Underdogs a bunch. And then I found the first album and the second album. And I was listening to those a bunch. And finally, I called Alex one day and I called my friend Jorge. And I'm like, Gogol Bordello are playing in San Francisco. Like this is the time. Like they're on tour, they're getting heat. We got to go see them. And the first time I saw Gogol Bordello, I was like, this feels like my first concert again.
Wow,
this is fantastic. So it would definitely be them.
I promise you now, I will be listening to them tonight. I'll be going back to you. And what's your third gig?
Third gig would be the band The Wild Hearts.
Okay.
Yeah. They're an English band from the 90s. I flew to New York to see them, but they couldn't get their visas. Oh. So I ended up spending 3 days in New York. I was 20, and my stepdad is a Wild Hearts fan. I was 20 years old, and I've only seen them once. They were playing at a now defunct club called Fat City in San Francisco. We emailed the club promoter and explained to him my plight, that I was 20 and legally not allowed to enter a bar. Yeah. I wasn't allowed to go in a bar. He tells us, if you can get to the city, meet me at a sushi bar down the street and we'll see about what we can do. So we go and we meet him at the sushi bar, but he is also there with Ginger of the Wild Hearts, who's the singer and guitarist.
Wow. So
Ginger looks at me and the owner looks at me and he goes, "Are you the young man we're escorting into the bar?" And I'm like, yes, I am. So then we walked over like 2 blocks away into Fat City, and then they were having the San Francisco band Jet Boy open for them. Jet Boy were okay. And there was another band too, but I can't remember them. And then the Wild Hearts played, and I'm a huge Wild Hearts fan. I know like most of their catalog by heart, and they played... they were playing their new album, which hadn't released in America yet, but I downloaded it and I was listening to it on repeat, and I was close enough to the stage that I was singing along with Ginger, and I could see Ginger looking at me going, how the fuck does he know these songs? Like, how does he know this well enough to know?
Yeah.
Because I'd been binging it for months before I saw them. And that one felt really special.
That is cool.
Because I love this band. They hardly ever play America, because America criminally just like ignores the Wild Hearts. It's almost like the American media is allergic to the Wild Hearts. So being able to see them was really special. But they also had like CJ wasn't there, but Richie was on drums, and then Danny could not come, sadly. But it was still core enough members to the Wild Hearts for me to feel really secure in that.
No, that's a really cool experience, as well as a great gig, right? So
right,
yeah. And I forgot, that you're in San Francisco. If only we'd known each other beforehand, because I was over in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago. So
well, I live in Texas now.
Oh, you're in Texas now? Oh, okay.
I was born and raised in California, and I lived there for 32 years of my life. And these last 3 years, I've been in Texas with my girlfriend.
Okay, let's change tact altogether now. Sporting events. So these are sporting events that you don't have to have been to. They could be ones you've watched on TV, some big moments. But yeah, what would be your sporting moments?
Okay, I'm not really into sports, But thanks to my stepdad, I went through a phase where I was a West Ham supporter.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And I watched the 2004 World Cup. I remember we watched the whole thing though, like the premiere, like the matches up leading to it and all that. So I would probably just choose to rewatch that because that's also when I was into it for a little while. Like I spent 3 seasons as a West Ham guy, and so watching the World Cup, but actually being into it too. Like I totally get why people are into sports because I spent 3 years as a sports fan. And that was a cool World Cup too. I can't remember what made it special, but something made it stand out. I think what made it stand out was because it was the first time America was acknowledging the World Cup existed.
Yeah. And before anyone is screaming at this, listening to it, it would have been 2002 or 2006, actually, before all my football friends have a go at me. Yeah, because in not 90, it might have been the one, 98, I think, was in America. I can't remember, but there was one World Cup where it was in America, and over here they were showing pictures of journalists outside the stadiums in America as they were happening and saying, do you know what the World Cup is? And people saying, no, what's that?
Maybe it was earlier then. Maybe it was that one.
Maybe it was that. I'm just double checking. Yeah, I've got a feeling.
I remember it being early aughts. I can't remember, and I remember it was before high school. So yeah, that's why maybe it was
94. I think 94 was America actually. I believe the next one's going to be back there. But West Ham. Sorry, going back to that. It's these random things you're throwing out that are getting me, Griffin. I have to say it to you. I wasn't expecting you to talk about West Ham on this podcast. Okay, so World Cup. I mean, look, what I would say as well is, even if, like, my wife, she's not a massive football fan, but she'll entertain it when I'm watching it.
Sure.
But the World Cup, there's something she loves as well, because there's something about all the fans of all the nations all descending into the same place, right, and seeing the colours of the flags. There's just something special about it. And I think when you're younger as well, as a kid, as a teen, I think it means a bit more to you as well, doesn't it? Because you're getting into sports and it's a spectacle, isn't it?
It was. I spent like 3 years as a sports fan, and then I just kind of got out of it because, again, I was starting to develop friends and we were going to like concerts and stuff, and that's when I was like, oh, music really resonates more with me than sports do.
But also, it's funny, isn't it, that you get the music that's associated with the World Cups as well. And
I used to sing Blowing Bubbles, like West Ham's chant. I knew it, and when Green Street Hooligans came out, let me tell you, I have a special connection to that movie.
Oh well, there's a whole other conversation we have to have, but yeah, just confirm. Yeah, 94 was the first World Cup, or it was the.
Okay, well, so the one I watched. Maybe it was like 98 or something, because it was not that late into the 90s. I very remember it being early aughts before high school. So 98 sounds right.
Okay. We've got the World Cup, West Ham and the World Cup. Any other sporting?
Yeah, not real. That was my one time I flirted with sports. When I was a kid, I did Little League, but I think everyone does a sport when they're a kid in some fashion.
No, that's fine. That's fine. The World Cup and West Ham are great ones. I'll give you that. Food items. We're going random again.
Okay, I would have to say the first time I ever cooked my own spaghetti.
Okay, yeah.
I love cooking, and I'm good at it now. And the baby steps of learning how to cook, everyone stumbles. Everyone will burn your food. Everyone will undercook your food. Everyone will have to throw away your food, and you go, well, now I'm broke and hungry because I just ruined this. But when you first get good at cooking, when you first go, oh, I did it. Like, I nailed it. I can cook this dish consecutively, and it's going to taste good, and I know it. So I have a spaghetti sauce that takes 6 to 7 hours.
Wow, yeah.
I'm going to let it simmer, and I onions and crushed tomatoes, diced tomatoes, tomato paste, 1 large carrot to cut out the acidity, a bay leaf on top of that, a little bit of white wine, salt, garlic, a little bit of pepper. I make this spaghetti sauce that would make like mama cry, So the first time I got sick, and now I make it like I stick on music and I'll open a bottle of wine and I'll drink and listen to music as I'm cooking. I get really into it. So the first time I made my spaghetti sauce and I sat down and I had the spaghetti made and I'm like, okay, I've just spent 6 hours doing this. Like I didn't have a recipe. I'm just kind of going off of like tasting as I was building and making it. And I remember sitting down and I actually took a bite and I'm like, I didn't cry. I didn't cry, but like I cried, I felt like I did it. I was able to source the ingredients. I was able to buy this. I was able to put it all together, and I cooked. Like it's the first time that I felt successful at a life skill that I'm like, oh, I can do this I'm hitting the target every day of the week now. And now I can cook steak and fish, and I can make stuff from scratch, and yeah. But it all started with that spaghetti sauce.
I'll definitely come into your house then at some point.
Please. We just got a barbecue. I just made ribs the other week.
Oh, barbecue! Don't listen. Oh, don't. It's getting late here. I've already eaten, so this is a bad conversation. Spaghetti, and that's the thing. Quickly, I was going to say that people will look at it and say, "Oh, spaghetti bolognese," but like you said, 6 hours to make a sauce. Anyone could just chuck a tin of canned tomatoes onto some pasta, right? But it's about what you how you make it, what else you put into it, and like with anything like that, the longer you do it for, as in the amount of hours, like 6 hours to make a sauce, most people wouldn't think about that,
Right, and that time, because it was kind of watery, so I just kept letting it reduce and dissolve, and that's also concentrating the flavor, and that's why you have the carrot and the bay leaf to mild out the acidity. And
okay, so what's next?
Probably okay. This is going to be really Californian, but I am a Californian. The first time I had In-N-Out.
Okay, yeah.
It is an initiation to every Californian. And I think you have your first In-N-Out burger. You're born, you're given In-N-Out, and then you can become Californian. You're given a Red Hot Chili Peppers CD on the way out, too. But yeah, Pulp Fiction, this is the memory I have. My mom, my uncle, his girlfriend, Pulp Fiction is on like the VHS player, and I'm eating In-N-Out. And it obviously had to be a year after Pulp Fiction had been in theaters, because we're watching it on VHS, like on like a video. And I just remember being like, I don't know, like 9, 8 or something. And I just remember that very distinct, this doesn't taste like McDonald's. This doesn't taste like Burger King. This is something good. This is like not a normal burger. It's better than like what I'm like a Happy Meal or something. This is better than that. Yeah. And I just, that memory is like Pulp Fiction on the television, my grandfather's living room, my uncle, his girlfriend, my mom, and I'm just eating In-N-Out.
Nice. Yeah, I had that a few weeks ago when I was over, because it's not a chain we have over here. It's not a brand we have over here. So
right. And it's only 6 states have it here too.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So it's always nice to try something different. We were going from place A to place B. We stopped at this place in the middle of nowhere. They just had a couple of food options. One was In-N-Out, and what I like about.
So how was it?
Well, no, it's really good. Again, like you said, because it's not McDonald's, it's not Burger King. Do you know what I mean? It's not your standard.
Right.
Thing. And what I really like about it is that they've only got 2 or 3 things on the menu, right?
Yep. And there's a secret menu too.
Oh, of course, yeah. But that's what I like. That it's just simple. This is what we do. We do it well. Yeah. Okay, so spaghetti bolognese, In-N-Out burger, and what's your final?
So my third food that I'd have to like. Okay, I grew up in a little town 45 minutes outside of San Francisco. Town is called Tracy. When I lived there, across the street from my high school, there was a taqueria called La Costa. The best burritos on the planet.
Wow.
Like the biggest, fattest burritos on the planet for like $5.
Wow.
And it was so good. We would go there for lunch. Like if you were on school, you just walk across the street to go get it. La Costa, I'd grown up eating Mexican food from my grandmother or my great-grandmother and then my grandfather, but La Costa was just something else with those burritos. They were just value for money, but awesome. Like The people behind the counter barely spoke English, and I can't speak Spanish to save my life, sadly. So it was a lot of like me doing the like pointing and then like asada, please, no. So it was a lot of that, which is really painful for me because I am Hispanic. But yeah, those burritos just killer, so good, so good.
Good food is good, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, like when you find good food, it like changes your soul a little bit. You're like, oh, how come I don't eat this all the time?
And this is it. And this is why whenever we go somewhere, always try to find someone who knows the area, because you want to go where like the locals eat, or you want to know the secret spots. You don't want to just go to the big food courts or whatever. And I'm not saying there isn't good food there, but you want to know the secret spots. You know, the places you won't necessarily find if you just got 24 hours in a place. All great options there, and yeah, made me very hungry. So we've got 2 more sections left. We've got books and life events. So if we say books, but we probably won't be able to go too much into them. But if we had to choose 3 books,
well, can 2 books and a short story?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, short story: H.P. Lovecraft's Pickman's Model.
Okay, not one I'm aware of.
It's not part of his Cthulhu stuff. It's just the short story about this missing painter. And his friend is asking about Pickman, and this guy tells him about the last time he saw Pickman, and it's a fantastic little short horror story. But in that story, to me at least, it says so much about art, and it says so much about art versus commerce, and about as an artist, I firmly believe you sometimes have to bleed for your art. Like, if you want it to be real, cut your hand and put it on the page, and that's your signature. Like, if you want to be an artist, you got to bleed for it sometimes. You got to put yourself on the page, you know? And Pickman's Model, whether or not H.P. Lovecraft meant to do that, or whether that was the metaphor or the analogy, or whether that was the imagery, Pickman in his story died or disappeared for his work. And that, when I read Pickman's Model, I'm like, see, I'm not crazy. Someone else gets it.
Yeah.
Like, that guy made Cthulhu, but someone else still understands that sometimes you have to go to extremes for your art. And that the short story Pickman's Model really resonates with me. The other 2 books, one of them is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Okay, yeah.
Like Hunter S. Thompson. And that, like, my first book, which no one will read ever, unless it's heavily edited and rewritten. It's called California Gothic, and it reads like me writing like Hunter S. Thompson. It was my first shot at me going, I'm going to be a writer.
Yeah.
So this is what I know, because as an artist, you first imitate what you know. So my book starts off with, in this foul year of our Lord, 2002. And that's exactly what that's something like Hunter S. Thompson would write, you know? But Vegas specifically is written in such a way and captures such a special time in American history and counterculture. And it's being written by Hunter S. Thompson. The book itself, you can look at it and go, well, this is just a drug-fueled nightmare. Or you can look at it through the eyes of Hunter S. Thompson. It's like, no, this is not just Hunter dodging work. This is not just Hunter in a drug fuel. This is not just Hunter in a craze. This is Hunter realizing that time will destroy empires. Like, this is Hunter S. Thompson realizing that the 60s in San Francisco is done. It's no longer the wave speech, right? It's iconic. But it's when Hunter realizes, like, you can't go home. Like, you can't go back. Like, time is going to keep moving on. And so we have, like, what is the American dream? Like, Hunter started out going there for the Mint 500, and he ends up spending 2 separate weekends in Vegas on a drug-fueled rampage to find, like, the American dream. What he was looking for was balance. Hunter went out there, and he ended up finding, like, oh, shit, everything's fading. Everything's modernizing. Everything is becoming less sincere. Everything is becoming more jaded and cynical. Yeah, and it kind of rocked him, and that's part, like, if you look past the mania of the Vegas book, you can find, like, if you go up to a high mountain in Vegas and you look west, with the right kind of eyes, you can see where the wave broke back. You know,
Right,
you can
yeah.
see like that was the last shot that we had, and now we're dealing in the aftermath of it. So Vegas really resonates with me. The other one would have to be Hunter S. Thompson's biography that was written by his friends and family and loved ones after he committed suicide, and that's called Gonzo. And that's because I'd seen Fear and Loathing, the movie, a bunch of times, and I'd seen Where the Buffalo Roam, and I'd read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but my mom got me the biography, and I'm like, okay, and I read it, and I'm like, oh my god, I totally understand Hunter S. Thompson. Like, I resonate so well with his beliefs, or it was almost like Gigi Allen, you know? Like, you can say they're deplorable or they're despicable or they're report, and Gigi Allen is. He did things that I don't stand for, that I don't agree with, but on a spiritual level, on a punk rock level, on a Hunter S. Thompson living by his own life, like making the world bend to his will, that I resonate with. He was unapologetic. He was living life by his hand, by his means. It didn't always work out. A lot of the times it didn't work out, but he never yielded. Like, his friends, the book is chock full of stories about Hunter being bombastic and loud, and Hunter being depressed, and Hunter feeling trapped by his fame, or by, like, the Gonzo character and persona. But if you look past all of that, if you look at what they're saying, Hunter S. Thompson was an alien. He did not blend with the generation that he was writing in. He didn't mix, he didn't merge. He was uncomfortable amongst the human species. And it was lucky that we had him. You know, like, Hunter S. Thompson, the least factual but most accurate political writer we've ever had.
You know, well aware of the book, but it's not one I've come to read. And I was speaking to someone recently who said they tried and they said it was very difficult to get into. But yeah, I think it's one of the ones, like you said, that you've just got to give it the chance, right? And
yeah.
All right, look, cool. Very good choices there on the books as well. So the final thing is, and I kind of vaguely call it life events. And, you know, like I said, it doesn't have to be anything too personal. It doesn't have to be anything sort of more. It could be something as simple as like learning to drive. But yeah, are there 3 moments, you know, in your time to hear that you'd like to relive?
The first night I finished my first book.
Okay, I can, yeah.
Like writing.
Yeah.
I wrote California Gothic, and it's totally on the art side. There is no commerce. Spelling mistakes. It wasn't edited. It doesn't have a glossary. It doesn't have a table of contents. It doesn't have page numbers. The grammar is all over the place. But again, when I finished it, I'm like, I just did 250 pages. And I just wrote that in 2-3 weeks. And that was me sitting here writing 8 hours a day. I think I can do this. Yeah. Like, I remember finishing the book, and I remember putting it on Amazon, and I remember leaning back and just like, I'm an author.
Yeah. Must be incredible. Yeah.
I'm an author. Like, that's mine. And then it wouldn't be until years later when I'm like, okay, they're trash. I need to take them down and rewrite them. And, you know, now they're still online, but inaccessible until I edit them and re-release them. But yeah, that finishing the Gothic book, California Gothic, was a moment where that's when I decided, because I'd come off of like other stuff too, where like things in my life weren't going great, and I had some personal problems and some demons and stuff. And California Gothic is kind of what saved me, because I'm like, this is like, I am a writer. I've always been a writer. I've been denying it. I've been ignoring it. In high school, I wasn't much of a singer, but you know what? I was a hell of a writer. I wrote poems on MySpace. I've always been into writing. And so when I finished Gothic, I'm like, I'm a writer. Like, I get it. So that would be one moment to do.
And that goes back to what we said right at the start, that I can only imagine what it must feel like to have a completed book. So, and I will only ever imagine it. Okay, what's next?
Next up on life events, I don't know why. I don't know why this is going to be it. I'm 8 years old in San Francisco. I'm wearing one of my favorite t-shirts when I was a kid, and it said, "Brood Dog says if you have an itch, scratch it." I'm standing on the edge of the seawall on Pier 39, and there's an older man with a fishing rod. And at the bottom of his fishing rod, he has a shark. and there is a crowd of people gathered around him. And I'm watching, and I say old, but probably in his like 50s or 60s. So not old, but from an 8-year-old's perspective, old, right?
Yeah.
So from a child's perspective, he was old, but but he has this. And thinking about it now too, like this dude had it. Like his fishing pole was industrial. Like it was like thicker than any fishing pole I'd ever seen. It was heavier. The line had to be like 1.5 inches thick. It was massive. But at the bottom, he had this shark, and he was just fighting up against with it. And something I remember watching the shark thrash against the lower half of the seawall, and that memory is like burned into my brain. Like I don't know why it had such a vivid effect on me, or like a visceral implant, but something about seeing nature, I guess, like because it wasn't just. You've been to San Francisco. You know what the seawall looks like. Yeah. It's the ocean. Yeah. It's the Pacific. It's not a lake. It's not a gully. It's not a gulf. It's this middle of the ocean. Seeing that animal, like that creature in its natural habitat, and then seeing this dude just try to like reel it up. Like now thinking about it, it's like, oh, I get why you're doing it, because this is a once in a lifetime catch. And even if it breaks, you can at least say you fought against a shark. Like it's you versus Mother Nature. I get it now, but when I was a kid, I was just so mesmerized by that scene. And I think I stayed there for like 5 minutes just watching the shark thrash against the wall and the waves. And it was a whole thing. And in the end, the guy did lose it. Like the line did break and the shark just vanished back into the water.
I was going to say that'd be pretty incredible if he could.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it would have been much different, but yeah, no.
But I think, like you said, I think as an 8-year-old, I can absolutely see why that would, because it's something so unusual, right? It's not something you'd expect to see.
Right. I had family in San Francisco. I know San Francisco like the back of my hand. I've hung out there constantly.
Yeah.
So it was just not another day in the city. It's not something you see casually, you know?
Yeah. Okay. And what's your third?
So the final life event, I am in New York. We were supposed to go see the Wild Hearts. They couldn't get their visas. So my parents and I are in New York. And for some reason, I decide I want to go to the Dakota building where John Lennon was shot.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I go to the Dakota building. I go to Strawberry Fields. And I don't know why, but I'm on Ellis Island, and I'm looking at the Statue of Liberty, and call it a moment of patriotism, which is something that I'm not very patriotic. I'm more cynical, but I just had this thought, and I maybe it was looking after all the names of the immigrants, or maybe it was like just being in New York and being like 15 or 16 or whatever. Yeah. But something clicked when I was looking at the Statue of Liberty. And I just had this weird feeling, and I'm like, I feel like I've made it. Like, in this moment, I'm on top of the world. Like, on this moment, I've conquered all my enemies. I've overcome every obstacle. And at this moment, I'm standing unchained and free. And I don't know why I thought that. I don't know where it came from. It wasn't even like the Statue of Liberty filled me with pride or anything, because she's French originally. Yeah. It was just... Maybe it was the right time of day. Maybe it was cold enough and the sunlight hit me in the eye and caused something like a neural flash of something. But yeah, I just remember having like a moment where I'm like, in this moment, I have won. And since then, I've had that feeling like 1 or 2 times. And that's how I know what it feels like. Because the first time I thought about it, I'm like, when's the first time I ever felt like that? And I'm like, it had to be that time in New York.
Well, look, I think what a perfect way to end your mind wipe. I think that's a perfect feeling, and hopefully we've all, everyone can get to have that kind of feeling, because we don't often. I'm not saying this is what it was in that moment, but going back to say your book and everyone who's got a podcast or does something, we don't often take the moment to think about what we've done and what we've achieved, right? And just to have that moment of just happiness, right? And pride, I guess, in oneself and what they've done, right? So, yeah. But look, what a perfect way to finish. I I just, what I've been thinking about the last 10 minutes we've been saying this is how it's taken so long for our paths to cross, because it's just been great speaking to you. And I think there's definitely so much more stories that we could probably pick up on in another episode. So firstly, I want to say thank you for being on. Secondly, hope you enjoyed that. And thirdly, do you just want to shout out, your work and where people can find you?
So, first off, thank you for having me. This was fantastic, and I would love to come back.
Excellent. We'll sort it out.
I would love to come back. Secondly, if anyone is interested in more of the personality, every Friday or every other Friday, there's the Reboot Deboot podcast. And you can find us on Twitter at Reboot Deboot Pod. Aside from that, we're on Stitcher, iPod, or iHeartRadio, Good Pods, Apple, wherever podcasts live. You can find Reboot Deboot. And if you're interested even more, I stream on Twitch Monday through Thursday at the Renegade Jester, all one word.
Right, all that's left to say is thank you. Yeah, we will talk again at some point about getting you back on. It's been a pleasure. So thanks again. And for everyone listening, I will see you next week for another episode of Casting Views.
1, 2, 3, 4. If I want your opinion, I will give it to you. Come on, check what we've got, 'cause you need it. Don't make us get a spark and force feed it. Come on.